Hey everybody, what's up? Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems and Juggernaut AI. And today I'm going to be talking to you about designing a hypertrophy block for powerlifting. So if you're interested in getting customized training for yourself, this video, as all Juggernaut things are, brought to you by the Juggernaut AI app, and you can get a 2-week free trial by visiting juggernautai.app and link down in the description. So before we get on the whiteboard and start putting it together of how a hypertrophy block is actually going to look, we need to understand, why is hypertrophy training important to powerlifters? And the first thing that makes it important is that the most muscular powerlifters are typically the ones who win meets. They're typically the strongest lifters in the world. If you were to line up, maybe 10 100 kilo class, 220 pound weight class lifters, and you had, from international elite lifters down to class 4 beginner powerlifters, the thing that you would probably notice is the class 4 lifters are, 6 foot or 6'2", and the international elite lifters are, 5'7" and 220. And this doesn't mean necessarily that being short makes you better at powerlifting, though, all things being equal, it can certainly help. What that's really telling you is that the people who have filled out their frame the most, who are the most muscular, are the best lifters. And that's happening, in those taller lifters. By the time, if they were to ever make it to international elite, being 6'2", they're not going to be 100 kilo class lifters. They're going to have built more and more and more muscle until they're maybe, 308s, 140 kilo class, or the best weight class. That's why they call it super heavyweight. With that, the importance of that muscle is that the more muscular size, the increased cross-sectional size that you have, the greater force potential production you have. So it doesn't mean necessarily that, day one, because you're not going to pull a bodybuilder off the stage and have him beat a high level competitive powerlifter, but with time, and increasing the neural force production qualities alongside of it, that bigger muscle has greater potential to produce more force and lift the heaviest weight possible. There's some other benefits to hypertrophy training as well for powerlifters. It's going to increase your work capacity. So the amount of high quality work that you can do in the next phases of training, strength and peaking, is going to be higher and give you more potential to get stronger as you do that hypertrophy training and build more muscle and build the work capacity through higher volume work. A dedicated hypertrophy phase for powerlifting is also going to kind of resensitize your body to higher intensity training. Because if all you're ever doing are sets of 1, 2, or 3 reps in that heavy peaking style of training, your body is going to cease to have the directed adaptation, and we're going to get the other side of that coin. You're going to have adaptive resistance from doing the same thing for too long. So getting those higher rep sets, the higher volume work, some more exercise variation, maybe different tempos with the exercises, is going to help you avoid adaptive resistance and resensitize the body to high intensity training and make you stronger in the long term. Finally, another benefit to hypertrophy training is going to be that it's giving your tendons and joints a break from those really heavy maximal loads. And yeah, could you structure training that's not going to cause too much joint stress, even though you're training heavy all the time? It's possible, but it's way more likely that by giving yourself a little bit of a break, both physically and then also mentally from the just kind of grind and of that heavy load all the time, that giving your joints a break is going to set you up for more long-term, better training. That's what we're really here to do, is train for the long term, to get as strong as we possibly can, not just this month, not just in this training cycle, not just for this meet, but for years and years and years to come. So now that we know why hypertrophy training is important for powerlifters, how should we set up this hypertrophy training? So hypertrophy is building muscle, and really you can build muscle with any rep range as long as you're training close enough to failure. But we find the sweet spot to be in the compound list about 6 to 12 reps. If you're going heavier than that, so 5 or less reps, it's going to create fatigue management issues, and you're really going to get into more general strength training or peaking training. And yeah, that will build some muscle because you're training close to failure, but you're going to have to do so many sets of that it's going to be really demanding on joints, tendons, everything else. And if you're going above 12 reps, and of course this is all personal and individualized, but going above 12 reps in the compound exercises, then you're probably getting too far away from specificity, and the reps are going to become too slow. It's going to become more muscular endurance, effort, the aerobic demands of it's probably going to be beyond what you need as a powerlifter. So we find that 6 to 12 reps tends to be the sweet spot for most powerlifters as they look to develop hypertrophy. Now, training in that 6 to 12 rep range, how heavy should we be going? Most of the time, it's going to be 60 to 80% range, because we want to be training, you need to be trained close enough to failure to give those muscles the stimulus that they need to grow. So if you're more on the 10 to 12 reps, that's going to be more work in the 60 to 65% range. As you get up to to 6 reps, then you're going to be doing more 75 to 80% training range. But the majority of the training being done, 2 to 3 reps in reserve, 7 to 8 RPE, and occasionally touching 9 RPE, 10 RPE, taking sets to true failure. So when you're training for hypertrophy for powerlifting, it's also important that we choose exercises that support hypertrophy training well. So this is going to mean a couple different things. It's going to be exercises that support, bigger ranges of motion, good stretch through the muscles, like our friends over there at RP and Team Full ROM, Dr. Mike Israetel, always talk about. It's going to be choosing exercises that aren't disruptive to the other lifts, because we're not just training the squat or just training the bench press or just training the deadlift. We're training for powerlifting, the biggest total possible. So we need to train all 3 lifts effectively. So doing a lot of low bar squatting, maybe you can use a heavier load, but if it's too disruptive to your shoulder, elbow, arm health, that it takes away from your bench press training, that might not make it a good option for hypertrophy training. Then also in hypertrophy, we're going to be looking to avoid adaptive resistance in future training blocks. So some of that's going to be variation for variation's sake. So we're not necessarily doing the same exercise, through 12, 16, 20 weeks of consecutive training, but using some variations to, hit the muscles from a little bit different angles, have the force going into the joints and muscles in a little bit different way, and keep the body, sensitive and responding to the competition exercises as you get closer to competition and it becomes the appropriate time for those. So we're looking to train, a lot of muscle through a pretty full range of motion in a way that manages fatigue to handle high volumes in the lift that you're training, as well as the other lifts that are important to powerlifting success. And we're looking to avoid adaptive resistance through the training process. So some of my favorite exercises for powerlifters during a hypertrophy phase are in the squat. We're doing very, very little low bar squatting. Some people, if they're very flexible, might not have an issue getting into that tight low bar position and it won't disrupt their bench press. But even those people, I still like to have them high bar squat more so than low bar squat. Front squat, safety squat bar, belt squat, leg press, and hack squat variations are all going to be great primary exercise options during hypertrophy phases. For the bench press, any grip bench press can work. We'll tend to stay away from the competition grip during the hypertrophy phase to avoid that adaptive resistance. So if you're a close grip bench presser in comps, we're using more medium and wide. If you're a wide grip bench presser, we're probably using more close grip. So any of the grips really can be useful. Incline bench press variations, extended range of motion bench press variations. If you have access to a cambered bar, that can be a good one as long as your shoulders are healthy. Dumbbell press variations are going to have more benefit in hypertrophy phase than they would in any other phase you're training. And then training with machines like different chest press machines can be really valuable too, because it's going to just allow you to put a lot of stress on the muscle with a lot less neural stress or joint and tendon stress along with that. Now for the deadlift, we're looking at mostly conventional deadlift variations because we want to recruit as much muscle as possible and not interfere with our training of our other lifts. Could you do a lot of sumo deadlift training and it builds up your hips and glutes really well? Probably, but for a lot of people, that's going to be too stressful. Training sets of 6, 8, 10 reps in the sumo, too stressful to their hips, and it might interfere with their squat training. So we're typically looking at conventional variations from any height. So deficit from the floor or from blocks. RDL variations are going to be good here. Good morning variations I like much more in hypertrophy than in a strength or peaking phase. Using that as an exercise, like to get more out of less, using less weight. And that's just a theme to think about with all of these exercises, is that we want to get less out of more. So as you can kind of manipulate your tempo, maybe you're down on a 3 count with a short pause at the bottom position of the lifts, then exploding up. And if that helps you get, more muscular damage, more pump, really, for lack of a better term, in the muscles that we're trying to train with a little bit less weight, with 5 pounds, 10 pounds less neural stress that's along with that, and less, stress on your joints and tendons, that's going to be a good thing. So when you're choosing exercises for hypertrophy, for powerlifting, we're looking to avoid adaptive resistance. We want to use a lot of muscles through a big range of motion. We don't want to interfere with the training of our other exercises. So don't let your squat interfere with your bench or your deadlift interfere too much with your squat. So those are some of our favorite movements to use. Of course, if you have something else that you like and has worked well for you, by all means, go for it. All right, so now that we've talked about why hypertrophy training is important, sort of the general overview of how we want to approach it, let's start to put it all together on the whiteboard for you here so you can have an idea of an effective way to set up a hypertrophy block for powerlifting. Now, this is not the effective way. It is one of many possible effective routes to build more muscle, to set you up for more powerlifting success in the long term, but hopefully this gives you a better idea of where to begin. So in this example, we're going to train 5 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. We're going to have 2 primary bench press days, 2 primary squat days, and what I'll call 1.5 days for the deadlift. So we're going to bench on Tuesdays and Saturdays. We're going to squat on Mondays and Fridays, and we're going to deadlift on Wednesday and a little bit more on Friday, and that'll be the half day of the deadlift. So we talked about exercise variation and its role in hypertrophy training. So we want to have some variation for variation's sake to avoid adaptive resistance over the long term of training, but we also want to choose exercises that allow us to train with more volume and that don't disrupt the training of the other lifts. So I don't want to do a bunch of low bar squatting on Monday, knowing that I'm going to bench press on Tuesday and then have my elbows and wrists and shoulders be really sore. So we'll do some high bar squatting on Monday, and then our other squat variation on Friday. Couple, in a lot of different ways that you could approach this. I have a video called Variation for Fatigue Management that goes more in depth into this idea. But, unless you're really, really strong, big and strong, and this Wednesday deadlift day is going to be so disruptive, you can probably get away with another barbell squat variation here. But if you do feel too kind of wrecked from your Wednesday deadlifting, maybe the belt squat or a leg press variation here, but we'll still build in some fatigue management and we'll do the front squat here on Friday. So there's our 2 primary squat days. Now for the bench press, let's say that you're more of a wide grip competition bench presser. So we want to avoid adaptive resistance again, build in some variation, address weak points. So we'll do close grip. And then here on Saturday, let's do incline. And on our Wednesday deadlift session, we can do deficit. And then for our half deadlift session, you could use even something like a back extension. If you need a weighted back extension, 45 degree is preferable there compared to doing it on a GHR. So let's say you have access to that and you do a 45 degree back raise. So there's our primary work. Now, how are we going to load these? Well, as we move through hypertrophy training, the important thing that's going to drive that hypertrophic response is increasing volume. And that can happen in a lot of ways. I could do the same sets and reps from week to week, but just with a little bit heavier weight. And now volume has increased through increased absolute intensity. You could train for, with the same intensity, and maybe in week 1, you're doing sets of 7. In week 2, you're doing sets of 8. In week 3, you're doing sets of 9. Now you've increased the relative intensity because, of course, the same weight for 9 reps is harder than it is for 7 reps. You could increase the number of sets that you do from week to week, even at the same weight or at increasing weight. You could increase, so there's a lot of different ways to address this increased volume, and you can combine those different ways as well. And depending on how advanced of a lifter you are, you may be able to handle, more beginner lifters are going to be able to have steeper increases in volume from week to week. More advanced lifters are going to probably have to be a little bit less aggressive with it. So a lot of different considerations here. I have a very in-depth video called like designing squat training, designing bench press training, designing deadlift training that goes into this in for 20 minutes just on each lift and all of those considerations. But, dealing with probably more the middle of our bell curve here, we can make a small increase in intensity and a small increase in the total number of sets. So maybe this first week we're going to do, a set of 8 at 7, and then we do, 3 by 8 after that at, 60 to 65%. Bench press typically can handle higher volume than the squat or deadlift can. So, we might do something similar here, 8 at 7, and then we do 5 by 8 at 60 to 65%. Deadlift typically handles the lowest amount of volume of the big three, so we're gonna, stay with our same idea. 8 at 7, and then, we'll call it still 3 by 8 here. For the front squat, we want to have a little bit smaller session than our first day of the week, our primary squat day was. So instead of doing the top set and then 3 down sets, we'll just do 3 straight across sets here. And then for our 45-degree back raise, which you probably don't have an established max in, so we can't really deal with percentages there, but let's do a little bit higher reps because it's not as stressful as an exercise as the deficit deadlift would have been. So we'll do 3 by 10, and we'll call it 6 to 7 RPE for all of those. And then for your incline bench, finally, we had 6 by 8 total sets here on Tuesday. Let's do 5 by 8 total there. So this is going to be for your primary work. And of course, there's going to be some accessory exercises on top of this. With the accessory exercises for the upper body, we're typically looking at, a back exercise, so some sort of row, pull-up, or chin-up variation, and then some direct, shoulder training, direct tricep training, direct bicep training, your bodybuilding, pretend bodybuilder type of work that we're doing there. You're going to be doing that for a little bit higher volume. So if we're bench pressing for sets of 8, maybe your direct lat work, so your rows, pull-ups type of stuff, could be in that same 8 to 10 rep range, maybe 8 to 12. And then the more isolation work for shoulders, triceps, biceps, that's going to be more like 10 to 15 reps, maybe even, the occasional set of 20 plus, because that stuff, because it doesn't induce as much fatigue, you can train that close to failure or to failure a lot more frequently, with like a band tricep push down than you can a close grip bench press. So keep all that in mind as you're treating your accessory work. And then for the lower body work, we're going to be looking at some sort of, direct quad work, which I like to use unilateral exercises for that. So typically on one of these days, we would do a split squat variation on one of the squat days, a split squat variation on the other day, a lateral squat variation, like a Cossack squat, which I think is really underutilized by powerlifters and in a general phase, which hypertrophy is general by nature. Doing that more general work, lateral exercises, is going to be so helpful to keep you healthier in the long term, as well as getting your adductors strong, keeping your hips and low back healthy, keeping you moving outside of just up and down, forward and back that so much of powerlifting is. Similar on the deadlift day, and then we're also doing some posterior chain exercise like a GHR, reverse hyper, dumbbell RDL, glute bridge, a lot of different variations that we can use there. But again, with the accessory exercises, training a little bit higher rep range, you can train closer to failure more often than you would with squat, bench, and deadlift variations, because those movements just aren't as fatiguing, they're not as stimulating. So as we progress this week to week, we can increase our load, our absolute intensity. So just using a heavier weight, we can increase our relative intensity using the same weight for a little bit higher reps. So going from sets of 8 up to sets of 9 with the same load. We could increase our number of sets that we do. So going from, 3 back down sets to 4 back down sets. And you can combine those. You could go more sets at more weight. Typically, more beginner type of lifters are going to be able to do that and have steeper increases in volume from week to week, because you're adapting more as you go, and you're getting stronger faster in your beginner gains phase than someone who's been lifting for 10 years. But all of those are viable options. So, kind of dealing with middle of the bell curve population, probably watching this video, we'll combine those. So we'll go from an 8 at 7 to an 8 at 8.5 for your top set. And now from 3 sets of 8 at 60 to 65%, we could do 3 sets of 8 at maybe 62 to 67%. We could go to 4 sets of 8 at 60 to 65%. We could go to 4 sets of 8 at 65 to 70%, or 62.5 to 67. So let's stay at the same 3 by 8. We'll just go 62 to 67% and following those same kind of ideas here. Our top set goes to 8 reps at 8.5, and we're doing 5 by 8 now at 62 to 67%, 8 at 8.5, 3 by 8 at 62 to 67. Here on the kind of secondary work, maybe we increase the number of sets and increase the intensity a little bit. 4 by 10 at 6.5 to 7.5. Run out of room a little bit. All right, apologies, technical difficulties on running out of ink there. So on our incline, you could go up to 6x8 if you want, and then a small increase, 62 to 67%. And now finally in this third week, if we're training with what we call a 3+1, so 3 weeks of hard training, increasing the overload from week to week, and then a 1 week deload after. Maybe you go 8 at 9.5 to 10 if you feel good. Let's set a new 8 rep max there, a 8 rep PR. Again, you could increase intensity. So we could go to 3x8 at 65 to 70%. We could go to 3x9 at the same intensity that we did before. We could go to 4x8 at the same intensity we did before. We could combine those ideas. So let's keep the same number of sets. We're just going 65 to 70%. Same ideas over here. I'd be more inclined to stay more in the 9 to 9.5 RPE range on deadlift and squat than I would be on bench press. Bench press is just not inducing as much fatigue, so you can get away with going heavier more often. So sorry about it getting a little messy there, but you get the idea. From week to week, we're increasing volume. That could be a little bit heavier weights for the same sets and reps. It could be, an extra set. It could be an extra rep or two per set. It could be a combination of those. As long as we're increasing the volume of work from week to week to week, then we're going to be building more muscle. We're going to be building more work capacity, setting us up for success in the long term with our hypertrophy training. So the goals of hypertrophy training for powerlifters are to build more muscle, because the more muscular lifter typically wins, and that bigger muscle has more force production potential. We also want to increase our work capacity so we can do more quality work in the next phases of strength and peaking. And we want to avoid adaptive resistance by doing, we don't want to be doing the same thing for too long, and our body's accommodating to that. When you're setting up hypertrophy training, we're going to be training mostly sets of 6 to 12 reps for the primary exercises, a little bit higher rep range for the accessory, maybe 8 to 20 reps. That's going to be done mostly in the 60 to 80% intensity range. At the end of a hypertrophy block, right before you have a planned deload, go ahead, set a new PR. That might mean a 10 RPE. You don't want to be doing that all the time, but we do need to be training close enough to failure to stimulate the hypertrophy in the muscle. We want to be choosing exercises that allow us to train, that kind of lend themselves to high volume and bigger ranges of motion without interfering with training the other exercises. We don't want our squat training to disrupt our bench and deadlift training. We don't want our deadlift training to disrupt our squat training too much. It's all going to work together for the biggest total. We want to use variation for variation's sake, again, to avoid adaptive resistance. You probably aren't going to be the most successful you can be by just doing the competition lifts through every phase. Use some variations, hit the muscles from a little bit different angle. That's going to help you stay healthier. It's going to help you build more muscle and be stronger in the long term, and you want to have long-term thinking when it comes to strength. Hopefully the work on the whiteboard here gave you a good idea of how to set up a block of training. And if you're still confused about it, you can just sign up for a 2-week free trial of the Juggernaut AI app and get the smartest program for you. It's got over 4,000 reviews with a 4.9 star average. So people all over the world love it, from beginner lifters to advanced lifters and anyone in between. So I'm Chad Wesley Smith. Please comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Visit juggernautai.app for a 2-week free trial. Thanks for watching.